PvP in Destiny can be both incredibly fun and incredibly frustrating. And if you're trying to get a bit better, sometimes it can feel like you're smashing your head into a brick wall. But knowing what to focus on can help you improve your game much faster than just trying to brute force it. I've talked to tons of the top PvP players and content creators in the Destiny community trying to improve my own game, and I've compiled their best tips and tricks into this video. Whether you're wanting to improve your aim and sniping, get better at game sense and map awareness, learn how to predict the future in a match, or just choose your best loadouts for success, this video will have you playing at your best if you apply what you learn. I get the question pretty often, is it better to use something that you're really comfortable with or something that is like the meta best option? And I'm curious about your thoughts on that. Like if someone's a newer player and maybe they feel comfortable with a weapon that is considered by most people to be like a bad weapon. Obviously a good player can make essentially anything work to some level. But I'm curious what your take is on that, especially for newer players who may be getting comfortable with PvP and haven't put a whole lot of time in yet. Do you think it's better to invest the time to get good at the weapons that are considered the meta, or to like just use whatever you feel is the most comfortable?
I think where I would start is if you're comfortable with a weapon that's considered not good, is one, how like not good is it? Is it like absolutely terrible to where you're just kind of holding on to whatever makes you comfortable about it, almost to your detriment? And if that's the case, I would want to understand or like ask yourself, what about this weapon makes it feel so comfortable for you? And understand, like, is it a stat? Is it the handling? Is it something with like the aim assist on this weapon? And trying to find a weapon that is maybe a little bit better, that has a similar feel to that weapon. So you can kind of find that happy medium, because as much as it's fun to use weapons that feel comfortable, at the end of the day, if you're dead a lot of the time and you're just losing these weapons that are just so much better than the weapon you're comfortable with, it's not gonna be really worth it, and you're gonna be more frustrated than not going into PvP. So I would try to understand what makes you comfortable about the weapon you're using and what you enjoy about it, and then what are those traits and where can you find them in a weapon that maybe is a little bit higher in terms of, you know, the usability than the weapon you're currently using. So that would be kind of my opinion on it, because I know like people that like, I love Ace of Spades, and one of my buddies, he used Ace of Spades for a while, and he's like, it just feels so weird, I don't really like it. I was like, hey man, give it a chance. And I think, and then once he gave it a chance, he now loves it. And I think that's the other piece too, is being patient, allowing yourself time to like build that new muscle memory with a new weapon, so that way you can actually see if you really do like it or really don't.
I think that's a really good way to approach it, and I'd say generally my advice would be very similar.
And I think, you know, getting better can mean a lot of different things. So I think you can use a weapon that you're more comfortable with and maybe isn't as strong in the meta, but then understanding as you're trying to get, you know, quote unquote better, what specifically are you trying to get better at, and is focusing on using a weapon that makes you less comfortable, or that is more comfortable but not as good, keeping you from getting better because you just can't stay alive because you're losing fights purely because of that weapon. Then to me, that's, hey, you know what, like this is something as comfortable as it makes me, I'm gonna need to get uncomfortable, because that's ultimately what's gonna help me get better, is being uncomfortable and using a weapon that I know will get me better results.
I like that. Well said. Okay, so changing topics a little bit, one of the questions that Shadow asked us, which I thought was actually a really interesting question, was about staying alive in close quarters. So I think you're particularly good at this, so I'm very curious to hear your opinion on this. But a lot of times when people try to play aggressively in close quarter situations, they'll just end up dying a lot to, getting outplayed by shotguns or whatever.
I think close quarters play is a combination of a couple of things. It's one, knowing your way out or your escape routes, knowing where you are in position to your cover. I think it's probably the number one thing. So where am I? Where's my cover? What do I have to work with? Like, is there any cover I can slide between as I'm trying to, close the gap on someone? I would say the bigger thing though is learning how to correctly assess your radar and assess how close someone actually is to you, and really just trying to make sure in mid-fight, and this is not easy, is constantly glancing at your radar mid-fight. I think that's something that is just a built over time, practice thing. There's not really, I don't think, any secret trick. It's, you just have to get used to always glancing at your radar. I remember in D1 when I was trying to get better, and you're watching all these streamers, you're like, oh my god, I'm gonna play like that person, I'm gonna play like Pattycakes. And so I noticed they were always watching their radar, and so that's something when I would play, I would go into I'm gonna play for 3 hours. Those whole 3 hours, I would focus on constantly checking my radar and being like, that's the thing I'm gonna focus on for this play session. So being very intentional about what you're trying to improve, right? We kind of talked about this like when we talked about weapon comfort, like what are you trying to get better at? And I think weapon radar awareness is a huge factor in my ability to be successful in close range fights, because half the time someone's so close to you, and with how melees work in this game and the boomeranging and how hunters can jump and just all those factors, it can be very difficult to track someone depending how the fight's going close range and what cover you're around. So if I were to boil it down simply, focusing on your radar and trying to understand that, especially in close range fights, is going to be the #1 thing to help you be more successful, because then when you come out of cover to engage someone close, you have as much information as possible of where they're most likely to be, which is going to minimize how long it takes you to line up that shot and get the kill. Yeah, and I think all those things, like close range fights, in my opinion, are all about anticipation. You're trying to guess where someone's going to be before they're there. And so using things like your radar, like sound cues, but even like game sense, right? Like if you hear a hunter jump, like you mentioned, hearing the double jump, like if you play Destiny long enough, you kind of know like how long that takes for them to fall. And that again allows you to better anticipate in combination with the sound cue and the radar. So when you do engage or you slide out to take that close range engagement, you know pretty definitively where they're most likely going to be without seeing them at all. And so that's, I think the key is combining all those things together to really learn how to anticipate where your enemy is going to be. Because sometimes a hunter jumps over your head like mid fight and you're like really you're on top of them, and you have to like turn around because based on all the things we just talked about, they're going to land at a certain time behind you and where their head's going to be. All that stuff just takes a ton of practice.
So another thing that's kind of tangentially related to this is rift placement and barricade placement for Titans and Warlocks. So this is something that I think a lot of people who are newer to PvP, they have these class abilities, and Hunter dodge is actually pretty straightforward for the most part. Like, you dodge, to get back to cover, or to like, just be evasive and hard to kill. But I think a lot of people don't really know how to get a lot of use out of their rifts and their barricades. So you play both Titan and Warlock. Is there any tips that you have for people to get the most out of the placement of those? Because I think it's something that a lot of, especially newer players, could improve upon and instantly make themselves a lot more difficult to deal with.
Yeah, I would say the #1 thing with that is placing. I mean, if we're talking, I'll start with rifts. With your rift, you always want to place it near cover. Always want to place it near cover, and learning how, like, what's the radius of your rift, so that way when you place it, it's not like the whole thing is behind cover. You want like half behind cover, half like kind of sticking out, so that way you can play your cover in your rift and use it to like peek shot out of the cover and do damage. I think that's like the #1 thing. A lot of people, when they place rifts, they place them like way too far behind cover to where, okay, now you're just kind of stuck staring at a wall, or they place it way too far out and they're basically a sitting duck, and no amount of health regen is gonna keep you alive when you don't have any cover and like 2 people are shooting you.
At some point after you've grinded through all of the new final shape content, beaten the new raid, and collected all the gear that you want, you might be ready for a new challenge. And if you're into military games, WarThunder might be right up your alley. I wanted to thank them for sponsoring this video and also for helping me afford my awesome team that works with me to create my Destiny videos. Vehicle combat games can be incredibly fun and immersive, and WarThunder is maybe the best one on the market. You have access to over 2,500 unique vehicles. We're talking about tanks, planes, helicopters, and ships from the 1920s all the way up to today's technology. Without a doubt, these are some of the coolest military vehicles in history. But beautiful graphics, great sound effects, and immersive environments are not the only thing that this game has to offer by a long shot. The vehicle-on-vehicle combat is incredibly fun and addictive. Probably my favorite feature is the way that they do the damage modeling in a fight. Instead of just using generic vehicle hit markers like most games do, it shows an X-ray view of the enemy so you can see exactly what happens inside of their vehicle. You can spot where the damage occurs and how it affects everything inside. With a huge community of more than 70 million players worldwide, you can dive into PvP action right away. The game is free to play on PC and console, and both new and returning players who haven't played for 6 months will also receive a massive bonus pack across all platforms. Just use my link in the description or the pinned comment to get multiple premium vehicles, the exclusive vehicle decorator Eagle of Valor, 100,000 Silver Lions, and 7 days of a premium account. It's available for a limited time only, so don't forget to claim it.
All right, so we have two more questions. First one is talking about the common mistakes that you're seeing new players making in PvP. So basically, I think, you know, we both come across players of a lot of different skill levels, especially like in your YouTube comments and stuff like that. But what kind of things, like if you're taking a new young guardian under your wing and trying to help them out, what are your like top, like let's say 5 things that you want them to focus on to become a better player?
I think the first thing I would recommend to them is I still really love Nomad's, was it the 2-second rule?
Mm-hmm.
Ascendant Nomad's the 2-second rule. That I think is like a huge problem for a lot of newer players. They get so tunnel visioned on one thing and they don't realize that they've been standing in the same place for like 15 seconds, which doesn't sound like a long time, but in Destiny it like really is. And that everyone's kind of just shifting around you. So that probably my first one I would tell them is make sure you're, once you engage, to be constantly moving and never staying in one place for too long, because you're kind of, any advantage you did have in that engagement is probably slowly going away and you don't even realize it. As for like a second tip, I would say probably playing near cover. I think for me, like that's part of the reason I find myself being so successful in PvP is because I'm always near cover, playing one shot from cover like we've talked about in the past. I think is a huge thing. A lot of people, they slide out and they basically give themselves up to the enemy team because they have no cover and nowhere to go, when, like we talked about, they miss a shot inevitably, like we all do. And so what you're trying to do by playing near cover is just prepare yourself for the fact that what if you do miss a shot? What if this person does take a weird angle? What if they're lagging? All the different factors that could come into play. Playing near cover is going to allow you to compensate and have kind of like a get out of jail free card in those scenarios. So I think playing for cover would be another huge one.
I would attest to that. You're like one of the most annoying players to play against in a 1v1 because you'll never give up. Like, you'll never give up your advantage. You'll always play right next to cover until you're winning the gunfight, and then you'll push or try to close it out. But it's makes it really tough to play you, and it's the hallmark of a good player, right? Is there's a famous Halo quote about that, but basically, just like, why take a fight that you don't need to until you have an advantage? Exactly.
And I think, that just ties into overall survivability, because a lot of people will get so focused on, I want to get a lot of kills, I want to be aggressive, and, whatever the case may be, and focusing on your survivability, I think, is why that's so important. I think my next tip after that would go back to what we talked about earlier, radar, understanding Destiny's radar. Destiny's radar is a little bit different than other games. I think people come from Halo and they think it'll be like the same, but it's like very generous and very far. It goes very far. It also can like change hue based on someone's elevation. And so like understanding those different things and learning that game sense of like when your radar might be deceiving you a little bit, because you still see a lot of people, they slide out and the person's like 5 feet away from them or 5 meters or whatever, and way out of their range. And so that's a sign that a player doesn't understand their radar yet. So I think that would be, was that my 4th tip?
I think that's 4.
Okay.
It's kind of funny because your question about like how to get better, maybe I'll start with that one.
Sure.
It's kind of like the cold hard truth that like people always ask, how do I get better? How do I get better? And the sad and cold hard truth is the fact that they probably need to stop playing PvE and start playing PvP. They probably don't play it anywhere near the amount that they should. Like when you look at someone like Sir Demetrius, and in his videos he talks about how he has no idea where this one exotic came from, or he doesn't have this exotic, or I have no clue what this is, never heard of this, and it's been in the game for 2 years, and he'll laugh about it. There's a reason for that. All of those top PvP players don't know that much because they don't play much of the game, and I don't blame them. They're like, they live and breathe in the Crucible, and that's why they're that good. So for people to suddenly just expect to be able to become 10 times better, or just even improve at all without putting in way more time, it's kind of like unreasonable. So that's sort of like lesson number 1. Cut back on the PvE. Yeah, I mean, what is it? Jack of all trades, master of none. There you go. If you split your time across too many things, you're just not going to be the best at any of them.
It's funny, actually, at each season I feel that way. I like to split my time across both PvE and PvP. Like, I really do enjoy the PvE side of the game, And so what happens is like I'll spend like a month or two like leveling and trying to get all the new guns and like doing all this PvE stuff, and then I feel so rusty in PvP, and it's like it takes me like a couple days to like shake off the rust and feel like I can actually play well again. Whereas like you know, that towards the end or middle of a season when like I've done all the PvE stuff and I'm spending all my time doing, you know, scrims and trials and like just playing a lot of quick play, like my game's so much sharper just because I spend so much more time in the Crucible.
You know, you hear people say play confident. It's kind of the same thing. Like playing, removing your fear inherently just adds confidence to your gameplay, and adding confidence means faster decision making, and then faster decision making leads to, you know, the snowball effect of getting better, and then getting better or having better results leads to more confidence, and then, you know, I think it all started with just not being afraid anymore of being in a video game.
So one of the things we were chatting about before we started recording was actually how that ties into stuff like trials. So a lot of like newer players, a big name that you're coming up against, and all of a sudden like you might play a little different because like, you know, you recognize that, you know, big streamer, YouTuber, or whatever. It's something I think I've gotten better about over time, like not really worrying about who I'm playing as much, but especially like when I was kind of getting started with Destiny PvP, you know, maybe more into Destiny 2, like Destiny 2 PvP, when I kind of knew, you know, who the bigger guys were. Like you see yourself match up against them, and like, you know, you might play a little differently because you're either scared or, you know, you're trying to prove something or whatever, and that can kind of throw you off a little bit. So try to like pretend you have no idea who's on the other team and just play the same every game.
Yeah, stop checking trials report for God's sakes. Like, who cares about? Who cares? Like, just go in and do your best, and do your best to adapt to the way they're playing round after round. Knowing when you're dead. So if I decide to engage on, it doesn't even matter if it's one person or I think it's one and it turns out to be two, or it's a 1v3 or a 2v3, whatever it is that I'm doing, if I am engaging in a fight, it is so important to know when you've lost the fight or when you have a chance, like before it actually happens. So if I engage in a fight and I know there is a 0% chance that I'm going to get out of that fight, like no matter what, I'm committing balls to the wall. Like I am 100% committing till I die, which is most fights, right? Most people engage in a fight and then, yeah, they just are obviously fighting until they die. But there's actually a ridiculously large amount of those engagements that I bet you they could have got out alive and like not lost the fight. Like they got into the engagement, and then there was a point in time, there's a line that they crossed where it's game over. You've lost this fight. Or maybe you get lucky and you win, but there is no turning back. But up until you cross that line, that, you know, that imaginary line, you still have the option to continue fighting or to disengage. And I think that the most common mistake when I look at other people playing, like my brother, for example, it's not, if they just have so much trouble understanding where that line is, and when they're about to lose a fight that they think they can win. One of them is 2/3 health and the other one is maybe 1/3 health or whatever, right? Like, it's like chances are you'll hit one of them twice, or each of them once, or you'll get lucky and you'll hit one 2 times and the other one once, kind of thing. So, you know, you either commit and have with the full intent that you've died, but with the intent that your teammates are going to go in and wipe them up and you know, get that trade for you, kind of thing, or maybe even come out on top and get both of them, or like just backpedal immediately and leave if you've gone into that engagement. Like you got to make those decisions like right away. So yeah, that's a huge mistake that I see people, especially when I do review someone's gameplay. They never seem to disengage when they could have. They lost before they even knew it.
Well, in 3v3 modes especially, that really comes into play because you know, every person on your team's life really becomes important in those situations. And so if you die, let's say you're playing competitive, for example, and you die and you get picked off, all of a sudden then your team is in a 2v3 situation where a good team is going to take that advantage and, you know, capitalize on it by snowballing and collapsing on your teammates, and then all of a sudden it's a team wipe. And if they're really a good team, they'll start using that to be able to control the map and force you to spawn split, where you're
spawn cycle.
Yeah, you're split from your team, and that can snowball into a loss very, very quickly. So, you know, I think especially in the more competitive modes, it is important to be able to know how to play your life.
Yeah, so I mean, this stuff would be kind of more like chip damage, so to speak, like doing a bit of damage in order to then do something. But yeah, peppering is another thing that you're right. Good point. People don't do enough of. Like if they get someone weak, if I have plenty of shotgun ammo and I get someone weak and they're running away, 2 seconds go by, let's say, and they're on 10 recovery, you know, and I don't know the numbers off by heart, but let's just say it's like 4 seconds for them to start recovering. But 2 seconds go by, like I did 19 damage there, so I could shoot from even way further and still do 1 damage. If I just do 1 damage 2 seconds after, you know, you decided to disengage from our fight while you're trying to run away, I've effectively reset your health regen. Like I've reset it completely at that 2 second mark. So now maybe instead of a 4 second timer for you to start getting your health back, you've now let 2 seconds go by plus another 4 seconds has to go by. So now it's 6 seconds. So all of a sudden, just by doing that, which, you know, poking, peppering, I've made you go from a 10 recovery, you know, stat build to like a 0 recovery stat build, just from doing that. So yeah, that's true. That's something I wouldn't even call that like a mistake. That's just something I do not see people doing at lower levels of play.
Absolutely right. I think the skill gap with movement in Destiny is less about the technical aspect, you know, the actual challenge of executing the movement, and more about you're exactly right. When to do it, when's the most appropriate time, and how can you be effective with that movement at that particular time. I think that's a really good distinction to make. Absolutely, we're on the same page with that.
I wanted to also mention, because I think a lot of people don't know this. I actually didn't for like a while when I first started playing Destiny years ago. And I know this for Hunter. I'm actually not 100% sure if this is true for Warlock and Titan, but the amount of time you actually hold your jump for your baby jump impacts how high you go. So if I just tap it real fast, like I have it bound to my mouse wheel down like this, which is like minimum input, that actually goes less than if I hold it. So that's actually impactful sometimes, because like if I just did like the smallest jump, I kind of did a double jump there, but if you just do like the little baby jump, like here, you might not hit it without clambering, but if you do like depending on your mobility and everything, if you hold it, you might cleanly get up here. So just a little tip, a lot of people don't realize that on Hunter, if you want to jump higher, you actually hold the spacebar or whatever your jump is, both for that first jump and then I think also for the extended jump.
Second jump.
Yeah. Speaking of movement, there's one other semi-advanced technique I would say that you'll see a lot of good players do with their double jump, which is banging your head against ceilings like this to increase your
Hunter
speed.
surfing.
You watch any good, especially good stompy hunters who are wearing the boots that you're wearing right now, you can really pick up a lot of speed by jumping and bouncing your head off of ceilings like that. And it's of course dependent on the map geometry. Like some maps like Burnout are really good for just, you can zoom around so fast because of the low ceilings. Whereas like this map kind of has higher ceilings, so it's not so helpful in this rocket room here, but it can be. So
it can be, and folks always have to kind of keep in mind that take advantage of any opportunity to do something like that, to do hunter surfing, right? Or ceiling surfing. It's just like you can do it. I do it on door frames like all the time, you know? So even though the ceiling's pretty high on this map and there's bars in the ceiling too that actually end up impeding your surf, you can still do it on door frames. And there are these thick door frames on Javelin at Diamond that still allow you to get that momentum. And it's even more, I argue that it's even more important to do this now because hunters are actually slower than a Stasis Titan. They're slower than a top Dawn.
Yep.
You know, a top tree Dawn.
Yeah, that's sort of how you make up for that movement. Yeah.
Exactly. You know, and that's another thing I really love about Hunter as well, is because, you know, you said it right. It's this kind of a semi-advanced movement. There's a skill gap to it. There's a skill gap to that knowledge of how to get your hunter up to speed. Whereas, you know, with the Titan, it's fairly obvious, right? You just either use the melee on Stasis or you use the slide. On Top Dawn, you just double dash and use the extra momentum. You know, it's fairly straightforward. So that's what I love about the movement in this game in general. But that's what I love about Hunter, is because I feel like Hunter is just, a lot of the Hunter movement is very nuanced. Right, and you can tell a great hunter when you play against them. I can tell for sure. They double jump me, you know, with stompies all the time, and I don't even see them flip to the shotgun. I'm just dead, you know.
Yeah.
Sliding does two things off the top of my head. Keep in mind that when you crouch, you don't show up on the radar as frequently as when you're standing up, right? When you crouch, the radar is a ping. Think of it as a ping more than anything else. And when you crouch, you ping the radar less than when you're standing, which is, when you're standing, it's almost just like a solid red for the most part. It does lag behind your movement a little bit. And so that's how you know, even when it's a solid red like that, it's still a ping. But nonetheless, when you crouch, it pings the radar less. And so it makes it much more difficult for the enemy to know exactly where you are. The crazy thing about sliding is sliding does the exact same thing. As long as you're in that slide, the radar literally acts like you're crouched. That's the beautiful thing about sliding, especially with shotgunning and that sort of thing, because Destiny is also the type of game where you have kind of like a peeker's advantage, right? The first person to peek that corner, especially if you end up sliding it or coming at a high velocity, will likely get the first shot as long as that first shot is true. So that maybe leads me into the second thing, which is oftentimes the best players are going to slide a corner because it gives you the first shot. It's less predictable based on someone purely reading the radar. So both peeker's advantage and also that radar advantage that sliding gives you allows someone to come around a corner, and 9 times out of 10, if 2 people are on a corner and one person slides it with the shotgun, 9 times out of 10, that shotgunner that is sliding is going to kill the one that is not. And that's just purely just the Destiny's mechanics or whatnot. Mm-hmm. But it also is because anybody that is over reliant on knowing how and when somebody's going to come around a corner, the pacing by which somebody's going to come around a corner in order to get the target acquisition with the shotgun, it's not going to be as easy if somebody slides, basically, for both of those reasons. Sliding into that shot is just sliding into a sniper shot and actually hitting that shot. It feels amazing.
One of my favorite things to do in the whole game is to slide into a sniper lane, hit a headshot, and then dodge out as a hunter. It's like
yes. That is so disrespectful. It's so disrespectful when you do that.
You're so hard to hit. Like if you do something like this where you like slide in and then dodge, like you're only like you're basically never stationary then. But you still have full accuracy, and you're moving so quick. It's really hard to hit you. Well, that's kind of one of the things we were talking about at the beginning, is that I think a lot of what high level Destiny comes down to is situational advantages, and using things like that to kind of control, distance, for example, between you and your enemy is one big way that you can give yourself that like micro advantage for just a second. And that's what, I think that's where a lot of the skill gap in Destiny really comes down to at higher levels.
Yes, I completely agree. And we'll just expand it to just not just controlling, the distance, right? And distance is obviously, the engagement distance is obviously a large part of that, but just in controlling the engagement period. You're exactly where you want to be, exactly at the range you want to be, at exactly the verticality that you want to be at, if that's in play, and you have the weapon out that you want, and they have the weapon out that you want them to have out at that time. If you can do all of that, then that is the engagement, and if you can control that and push them in the direction to the point where that is the likely outcome of that engagement, then you got the dub.
Absolutely. And you can combine that with not only in a 1v1 situation, but also all of those factors coming into play in a team situation, right? Where you have, it's like each of those things are still present, but then maybe it's like a 2v1 instead of a 1v1, or it's a 3v2 and one guy's flanking, but it's like those little windows of timing are what ultimately might determine, if you win or lose an engagement, even if maybe you do have the temporary advantage from some of those things we talked about, but it's like your team's outgunned for a second because there's more of the enemy than there are of you because of positioning on a map.
But that's exactly right. Even in a 1v3 situation, the same principles apply. Obviously, there are substantially more constraints. When you see that split-second opportunity in order to get an advantage on a 1v1, you take it. You drop that first one, you control that orb, and then you try to reproduce that 2 more times.
Yep, absolutely. That's I'm really glad you're bringing that up. That's actually one of the things that I think are a lot of players who play more tactical shooters like Counter-Strike, Valorant, stuff like that. They tend to learn that because it's such a huge part of those games. And I think that it's a mentality that doesn't really get taught in like quick play and things like that. You kind of, in Destiny, you have to get either into like more scrim gameplay or like trials against like, good teams and stuff like that to really understand how that works. But you're totally right. Like basically the number one rule of winning an odd man situation, like a 1v2, 1v3, etc., is to turn it into a series of 1v1 fights so that you're only fighting one person at a time, because then you always have a chance to win each 1v1. But if it's a 1v3 and 3 people swing on you at the same time, they'll each only have to hit like 1 shot, whereas you have to hit 9 shots. It's like good luck.
Yep. Exactly.
Is there any particular tips you have for people if they're trying to kind of pick up that aggression without just sort of being a shotgun ape and running into their own death?
So first off, you want to be running a really good build, because if you're somebody that uses, let's say, low recovery, you're going to be kind of screwed if you try to run in, if you get shot at and you got to wait to heal like 5-6 seconds, whatever it may be. So first thing is to have a good build. I would say if you're especially on Hunter, you want to be running 100 mobility so you can have your dodge up very, very often. And also 100 recovery. Like I said, if you get shot at, you can recover a lot quicker and get in the gunfight quicker as well. The reason for the 100 mobility and the dodge, not only can you dodge and, you know, avoid people, you also get your melee ability back if you're running Gambler's Dodge. So let's say if you're playing something like Golden Gun, you shade step next to somebody, you can throw a throwing knife, whatever it may be. Or even if you're playing something like Night Stalker, you get your wombo combo a lot faster, your smoke bomb and your grenade.
So do you recommend, like, I know you've been playing like some Dawnblade lately. I don't know how much Titan you played, but do you also try to go for higher mobility on that, or do you feel like you don't really, because I know some players like to stay lower because they kind of feel like that keeps them closer to the ground so they can move faster. Do you have any thoughts on that?
For Warlock, okay, I'm like kind of different, because a lot of people tend to run really low mobility on Warlock. I still think you should run 100 recovery on Warlock specifically, because you get your rift up a lot faster. And obviously a rift on Warlock is really good. But for mobility, I typically stay around 50 to 70. I don't think you need any less than that, but any less than 50 kind of feels really sluggish to me. Because sometimes I'm not always Warlock skating with the Icarus dash. Sometimes I'm just jumping around normally. And you jump a lot slower with low mobility on Warlock. But some people like it because the skating is more consistent. It's just preference. You gotta run around and just test it out.
The other thing is your ADS, or so your strafing speed is a little faster on higher mobility. So like that's another reason I don't personally like to go super low mobility, even if it makes your skating better. Just because like when you're in a duel with someone, if you're moving slower, it's just like you're easier to hit. You know. So I always feel like that's kind of not really a trade-off that I personally like to make. What about Titan? Any thoughts on that one?
Titan, again, for all three subclasses. So for Hunter, you get your dodge up with 100 mobility. For Warlock, you get your rift up with 100 recovery. And for Titan, I don't know if I'd run 100 resilience, even though you get your shield up very often. I think around 80 resilience is good for Titan, maybe 70. And then other than that, mobility doesn't really matter too much to me on Titan. I think 40 is what I usually run on my account. And other than that, just focus recovery and intellect, I'd say. But just as long as you have your recovery up, that's all that really matters for Titan. But I'd say at least maybe around 80 resilience for your shield. So that way, if you get caught in the open or something, you put your shield up and you just always have it just to work with.
Yep, makes sense. So as far as like maybe more movement things and like mentality when you're trying to play a little bit of that more aggressive style, let me try to kind of think about what I see when I watch, especially newer players. Like, it seems like often they fall into one of two categories. Like players, as they kind of get used to the game, they become very passive, where they are afraid of everything. And so their reaction is to basically sit back, either with like, you know, scout, pulse rifle, whatever, just trying to kind of lane and try not to die. And they do that by creating distance between them and the threat. Or they go the polar opposite way and they become the typical shotgun ape, where they hold W with their shotgun out the entire game, and the only way for you, it's like they're pretty easy to stop as a more advanced player, because you could literally see them coming a mile away. But that type of player tends to like they get a decent amount of kills just by running into people, but it's like as soon as they play a better player, that strategy falls apart really quickly. So any thoughts on that?
So let's say for the people that just tend to run in and not really care about anything, typically those guys, for some reason, I see a lot of them they don't use their jump very often. They're very just one-dimensional, just sprint straight at you, don't even slide or anything. They just straight up just running. So if you're on Hunter, let's say, perhaps you could use the ceilings a lot. So what I do is I use the ceilings to bounce to get there quicker. And obviously if you're jumping around and stuff, it's a little harder to hit you. So for those who rush in and don't really think as well, like I said, with the jumping and the movement and stuff, you should definitely master what class you're using. So let's say if you're on Titan, you should try to learn how to Titan skate if you're playing on PC. If you're on controller, I can't really help you with that one. And same goes for Warlock. If you tend to play really, really fast, I would suggest playing on Dawnblade and learning how to skate on Dawnblade, because the speed you can get and the distance you can close is really, really good. Just try to get used to how to move around really, really well instead of just running straight at people, because you will get a lot more kills.
So let's transition to talking a little bit about like higher level play. Particularly, I want to chat about things like you've been in a lot of tournaments, you have a lot of experience there, and I think that even if players have no interest in playing in a Destiny tournament, you can learn a lot by how people prepare for those and how you think about the games, how you manage like, tilt levels if things aren't going well. Even if you're just playing, Trials of Osiris, you're trying to get like your first flawless done, or maybe you're like in the competitive survival playlist, you're trying to get to like, max rank or something. So what I want to talk about specifically, first of all, is any like sort of practice or warm up routines that you go through. Like, how do you prepare if you have like a big game or something that maybe money's on the line and you really want to play your best? How do you go about that?
So go back to when I was in Destiny 1. I used to always just tell myself I would play better if I didn't warm up, but for some reason when I transitioned to PC, it was like the complete opposite, just because I don't play really good when I just get on. So what I do is I actually play I don't know if you've heard of it, but I play Osu, a little bit of Osu. I played a lot of it a few years ago, and I don't really play as much anymore, but every time there's a tournament up, I always load up Osu, and I'll play probably for like 15-20 minutes. I have a bad habit of waking up really late and also not sleeping enough, which is really bad, and obviously you should sleep a decent amount before a tourney, but if I really am not feeling it, I'll boot up Osu for like 30 minutes, whatever it may be, and usually I'm good after that. For some reason, it just helps me a lot, so I guess gets my wrist and stuff going. I guess my mouse movement, just kind of used to it.
Yeah,
so.
That's cool. I'm in the same. I don't do that game so much, but I really enjoy Kovacs. Like I do that.
Or Kovacs, any aim trainer. Osu isn't really an aim trainer. It's a weird game.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Well, it keeps it gets your wrists warmed up. But I feel like to me, there's always like two components of aim training. There's like the actual mechanical like aim training itself, which is like I find very beneficial. Some people don't think so much, but I personally find it really helpful. But there's also like just the warming up of your hands before you play, just literally like getting blood moving through your hands so you're not cold in your first game. And I find that if I just even spend 10 or 15 minutes in Kovacs just doing a couple drills that are like just fast movement, you're just moving your hands a lot, that can be super helpful.
Exactly.
That's interesting to hear you say that. Any other warm-up type things that you like to do? Like, do you like to do scrim type stuff, or play rumble, or like what gets you in the zone?
Honestly, I think that's about it. Osu, and then I'll load up maybe a rumble with my teammates. We'll do a rumble probably for like 10 minutes beforehand, but just something that even if I just load it up to like quick play or something, it'd be enough. But
yeah. Tips for people who are first newer players, like people who are just kind of getting started with PvP, and then we want to also kind of dig into more of like the people who are aspiring to get to a higher level, whether that's getting flawless in Trials of Osiris or trying to get max rank in comp, or maybe even people who are wanting to dip their toes into like scrims and kind of like the community focused events that are kind of the real deep PvP endgame.
I think one thing that can be very helpful, like for someone that's newer, is learning the game. And I think the best way to do that is you can watch videos. But not really many people make videos about like, the interactions of abilities and how abilities work in the game and what counters what. That's kind of something you learn from situational awareness, and having good situational awareness and good game knowledge is like extremely helpful in this game. Like that's one of the biggest learning curves and skill gaps, is like knowing how the game works. So I would definitely just recommend playing the game. I know it's like kind of an obvious one, but that's one thing that people I feel like overlook. They want to look for like some like magical way to get better at the game, or like something like that, but honestly the best thing you can do is just play the game. Oftentimes I think finding a content creator that's good at the game is also going to help, and watching them. And
when you're watching them, like what specifically would you want people to like be looking for? Because I think it's like one thing to just watch like your favorite streamer, like you and Jake playing, or whoever people enjoy watching, but I feel like there's something like to be maybe like actively paying attention to certain things
for their habits, the way they move around the map, the way they call out, how they start at rounds, pretty much everything. But those mostly their habits, I think, is a good thing to pay attention to, because I think all good players to some degree have particular habits and like a certain way that they'll play the game, and like paying attention to that is very important.
So
talking about you yourself getting better, what if we look more like specifically, like what do you think, for example, has improved your ability to like aim better over time? Or do you think there's particular things, like if you take some new player under your wing and you're trying to teach them how to get better at each part of the game, what do you think is the best way to focus on like just getting better at actually hitting your shots?
I feel like for me, a lot of my aim is predictive. Like I'm typically trying to, before something happens, know what's going to happen. Like try to counterplay it before it happens. And that's like the way that I aim. Like I'm trying to always be thinking about what's happening, and I use my mind a lot more than like I don't reactionary aim that much, and I try not to. I try not to be reactionary aiming. Obviously I can, but I'm typically trying to like be predicting everything going on. And I think one thing that's improved my aim is just like peripherals, like making sure I have the best gear. Like I had a Logitech G502 and like some big XXL like mouse pad that's huge. And then I got a Glorious Mono Minus, which is a really light mouse, whereas the Logitech G502 is like 100 grams more.
I have one of those I use for editing still.
Yeah, and then and now I have a Lamzu Atlantis Mini, and like, you know, the Artisan mouse pad. So it's like that's all of those things, like the peripherals that you're using and equipment that you're using, can definitely contribute for aim, for sure. Because a lot of people that are very good at aiming typically have the best stuff. Like, of course, they're talented, but they typically are using very, very, you know, high quality gear.
Mm-hmm.
So
it makes a big difference. And I would even extend that to controller players too. Like if you're not, if you're trying to play a controller and you don't have one with like back paddles and stuff that help you, you know, aim while you're still jumping around the air, like there, I really think that all that peripheral stuff makes a huge difference. I've been, just like a small tangent, I've been tracking my reaction speed over time, and as I get older, of course you expect it to go down, but what's funny is when I look at those things like the human benchmark test, mine over the last 5 years has actually gotten faster. And I'm pretty sure it's not like me actually getting faster, it's just that the peripherals have gotten so much better that now with like, I play with a 240 hertz monitor, a mouse that's like 4K polling rate, and you know, a much faster PC, and it's like all these things like that you just, the image appears on your screen faster, and then also you're able to click it faster. And it's like, I mean, I think that yes, of course, like the most important thing is to get better as a player, but like if we're being honest, like any hobby that people get into, gear does help, you know, whether that's a sport or like, you know, music or gaming, like whatever you're into, like having better tools does help. Like to me, and again, this comes from playing years of Counter-Strike, where that is like a habit is just deeply instilled into your brain. The best way to aim better is to already have your crosshair where it needs to be before someone's on your screen. If you're doing it afterwards, like you have to react, and it's you know, it's just going to be a lot harder. Like great majority of my sniper kills in the last 10 years are because my crosshair was already in a decent spot and I just had to click or make a very small adjustment and then click, versus having to do some like wild flick across your screen while you're getting flinched and like, you know, you're getting pressured and grenaded. And it's like, if you just have your crosshair in the right place because of your game sense, like that is like 90% of the battle.
Yeah, it is 100%. And that's why I aim that way typically. I'm like trying to predict instead of being reactionary, because I mean, if the other guy's predicting, it's so much hard to outplay there.
Yeah, absolutely. From my personal take on aim training, after, I mean, I've been really into it for like 5 years, and part of it I just enjoy doing it because it's like a skill that I keep getting better and better at over time. But to me, it's like, I agree, it's definitely not a replacement for playing the game. I think that's like not the way to think about it. To me, it's more like, just like an athlete goes into the gym to practice, you know, build their strength. If they're like a basketball player, they want to jump higher. Like, you know, there's certain things they can do in the gym to build up those muscles, and you know, other sports, they'll do like specific training to work on, you know, things that you only come across like a couple times in a game. You could play an entire baseball game for 5 hours, but it's like you might only get to, you know, react to certain pitches like a few times or whatever. Or same, you know, with golf, it's like how many times you hit like a, you know, a big chip shot over a bunker. Like, well, maybe twice in an entire 18-hole round, but like you could practice that for an hour and get good at that particular skill. And I look at aim training the same way, where it's like you're just training like your ability to control your mouse in different situations at like rapid speeds, because you're getting so many iterations of that particular thing. And then the idea is to take that skill that you develop and then take that into the game and hopefully apply it to your in-game situations. Like if you're only aim training and your goal is to get good at playing any game, it's definitely not the best way to do it. You need to be spending at least as much time playing the game, if not like substantially more time playing the game versus aim training. Let's talk a little bit about getting better at Trials of Osiris, which is one of the modes that you have a plethora of experience with, since you stream it pretty much every weekend, helping people get to the lighthouse.
What do you want to talk about?
When you play against people in Trials, what are the most common mistakes that you see people making that you think, oh, like that, you know, that was like a window of opportunity they opened up for me that like they didn't need to do that. Like, for example, you know, people throwing their lives away one at a time versus you. Like, what kind of mistakes do you see people making that if they would eliminate making those mistakes from their game, they would be a lot harder to beat?
I think playing with their team is definitely one. I think indecisiveness is also very killer. Like, indecisiveness can be, I mean, that's something that comes with situational awareness as well. Like, let's say you kill one guy and you get weak. Someone's on the res and you just like sit there and let them get the res instead of pushing it. You have the opportunity there to push it and maybe catch that guy off guard and kill him, stop him from getting the res temporarily, and maybe teammates' time. That's one of the biggest things I see people do. I've watched, I mean, countless times I've seen people like be indecisive and like lose as a result of it.
Yeah, that's one of the things I've noticed myself too, like especially when I used to do a lot more trials than I do lately. But it's funny, it's almost like people have to develop like the algorithm in their brain of like how to make decisions on certain things, because it's so common to see people like kind of just be like stun locked with decision making. Like there's like, okay, there's like a res on the other team, like your team's killed one of them, so like one objective is to keep that person down. On the other hand, there's someone on your team who's dead elsewhere on the map. So then it's like you have to decide as a player, do I go try to defend the kill we already have or revive my teammate that, you know, is down and maybe put it in a good situation? And then maybe there's like heavy spawning on a different part of the map that you have to think about. And then there's also like a capture zone, you know, on a different part of the map. So it's like there's just this decision-making like matrix that somehow has to be created in your head. And I mean, I think the best way to learn how to do a better job of making those decisions is, number one, just playing a lot of iterations. So you just start to see what patterns work, but also, like you said at the beginning, like watching what good players do in those situations. Cause I think that you can really learn a lot from studying what people who are really great at the game, like how they decide what to do in those situations.
Yeah, I mean, for example, to put that, what I was talking about and what you're saying right now, the problem with what that guy did when he backed up is like he just couldn't back up. He had to fight that, and he either has to lose it there or he loses indefinitely because the guy gets reses. So it's like there's situations like that where like you don't have an opportunity to be indecisive, you just have to stick it out. And that's something you learn from like situational awareness and like repetition. And or watching good players. Like you can watch a good player in that situation and they'll know, if I get weak, I just have to continue to challenge, because if I back down, then he's going to have both those reses, and if he gets both those reses, then I'm definitely going to lose. So I can't back down here.
So I think that the first place to start would maybe be covering just some basic mistakes that we see a lot of players making when they try to snipe. I have a couple in mind, and we can kind of go off of that based on what comes to your mind. So the first mistake that I see people doing wrong all of the time when I watch videos of people trying to snipe and they send me their clips to like try to improve is always their crosshair placement. Some people call that centering as well, if you're more of like a controller or console background, but for mouse and keyboard players it's kind of more known as crosshair placement. And the whole idea of that basically is that when you're going to go for a snipe, if your crosshair is out in the middle of nowhere, like maybe you're looking at the ground, you're looking at the ceiling, kind of just out without, I don't know, kind of out in the middle of nowhere without paying a lot of attention to where it's at, it makes your job as a sniper much harder because you have to actually make a huge adjustment to flick over to where the person actually enters your screen. Whereas if you have really clean crosshair placement, all you have to do is hold it exactly at the area where someone will either slide out, run out, walk out, jump out onto your screen, and then you just click the button, or maybe make a very slight adjustment and then click the button and you get a kill. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I feel like crosshair placement is like the #1 thing that like I always see people doing, or like doing wrong, you know, like if they're aiming at the ground or aiming at the sky. But I mean, it also, I mean, that matters both when you're aiming down sights and when you're also just running around the map. Like when you're sprinting in Destiny, there's this like little like carrot shaped thing in the middle of your screen. And like that's where your crosshair is going to be when you ADS. So like when I'm running around the map, I always like make sure that like that is like somewhere near where a player's head level would be if they were to peek out from the corner. And another thing to consider with crosshair placement is that you have to like figure out like who you're playing against. Like it doesn't apply as much in 6v6, but if you're playing like trials or 3v3s, and you know that there's this player who always slides around the corner, it's really easy to just like place your crosshair a little bit lower. So if they slide out, it's like really easy to, you know, just snap to their head. But, you know, if you're playing a player who always jumps and like flies around the corner, you might want to aim a little bit higher so that you can just get that split-second reaction time onto their head.
If he's going to come out like exactly at the corner so that you have like no time to react to actually hit a shot, which I think like makes sense because people think, oh, you hear advice like that, like, oh, hold the angle where someone's going to come from or whatever. So like the natural instinct is like to, you know, just to hold like the perfect angle. But what people don't realize is that, you know, humans have roughly like, let's say a 200 millisecond reaction speed depending on how quick you are. Some people are faster, but either way, there's going to be a little bit of a delay from when you see that person that you actually click. So if you hold your crosshair like a little further out, like, can you run back and forth a little bit just to demo this? So if I could like hold it right here, there's basically no chance that I'm going to hit the shot right when you run by, because I have to like, you know, be ready to hit that. Whereas if I hold like a little further out, my chances of actually hitting that shot are like so much higher, especially if someone's sliding or they're moving much faster. Like if I hold a little bit further out from the angle like that, my chances of hitting that shot are tremendously higher as opposed to just holding it like very, very close to a particular angle. The thing is, like, I still play at what's considered, I'd say, a medium to low sensitivity overall. And when I forget exactly what the starting sense is when you launch Destiny for the first time, but it's like something like 15 or 30, or I'm not really sure. It's very high in comparison. And I think one of the biggest tips that I tend to give players when they're asking me for tips on how to snipe better on mouse and keyboard is to, like, first of all, look at your sensitivity, because if you're a brand new player, it's very likely that your equivalent CM per 360 is like, I don't know, like 5 centimeters to turn it a full 360, or like 10, or like, you know, many multiples faster than like myself or like many good players tend to play at. And the reality is that when you're playing at such a fast sensitivity, there are certain players who can control that, but it's much more difficult. And you have to develop like incredibly good mouse and finger control in order to do that. So one of the tips I usually give people is to find a somewhat reasonable sensitivity range that's kind of like similar to what other good players use, and then kind of work from there to find your personal preference. But you know, if your sensitivity is 10 times faster than like pretty much any like quote unquote good player, it's probably going to be a lot more difficult for you to make those very small adjustments accurately and hit your shots.
Yeah, I totally agree. And if I could, I'd just like to elaborate a little bit more on controller sensitivity. Yeah. It also depends on like what type of controller you're using, because I have a controller that has like pretty low stick tension, and a lot of people see that as like a bad thing, but I mean, I'm honestly fine with it. But it's just like another thing that you need to take into consideration. And then also when it comes to like having a really high or a really low sensitivity, they come with different advantages and disadvantages. Like for example, if you're on like a really high sensitivity, and you're trying to shoot someone who's really far away. Like I take an example in like Midtown, there's this like really long lane from like the heavy ammo all the way back to the spawn. And like if you're trying to snipe someone who's in the spawn and you're on a high sensitivity, you're gonna like, it's gonna be difficult to like do a drag scope because you'll probably overshoot them if you try moving your crosshair at all. Yeah. So if you're on a lower sensitivity, then it's easier to like actually like still move your crosshair without overshooting them. And then the flip side of that is like if there's a Dawnblade and I'm trying to shoot them and they're moving like super fast and like fairly near to me, like the only chance I have of sniping a Dawnblade is if I have like pretty good crosshair placement. Like whenever I hear a Dawnblade pop, I just start aiming like in the sky and like I just hope that they fly in, you know. And obviously I'm near cover so I can get away if you know they aren't where I predict and they throw a sword, you know, I can just dodge to cover. But like if you're on, you know, a different sensitivity, it might be easier to correct for that rapid movement of a Dawnblade.
Yeah. One other thing I guess would be interesting to chat about briefly is like helpful things like mods, for example, that you can add to your armor to improve automatically at sniping. Like, do you use like targeting mods and stuff much, or are you don't crutch on those?
I'm a big fan of targeting mods.
Okay. I am too.
I used to run one like a few weeks ago. This is all after the sniper aim assist changes. But recently I've been putting on 2 sniper targeting mods on my head, my headpiece, and I found that that's actually like, I mean, I know there are diminishing returns, but I found it's actually pretty helpful.
I'm the same actually. I if I can fit 2 in like my build, I will do it because I really do notice a difference from 0 to 1 to 2, especially with things like I remember when I first was trying to hit shots with Cloud Strike. Yeah, I just had like just hand cannon targeting on, and I was like, I felt like, man, I'm like not hitting anything right now. And then I put on 1 and it started working, and then I put on 2 and I was like hitting every shot, and I was like, wow, okay, this is actually, you know, it's pretty noticeable. But it's just interesting because I feel like there's this, I don't know, thought that like targeting mods, especially for mouse and keyboard players, don't matter for some reason, but in personal experience, I feel like they certainly help quite a bit.
Absolutely.
I feel like I notice that extra little aim assist quite a bit, because the thing is, like, even if you're an insanely good player with really good aim, like if it's more generous, that means that you can just take a little bit less time to be super precise with your aim, and you know that means you can react effectively a little bit quicker, and you just, you know, have more margin for error. And like the thing is, Destiny is a game with really fast erratic movement, so any, you know, advantage that you can give yourself is I think worth taking.
Like, if we're just 1v1ing here, Patty, if we're just 1v1ing, I'm having to think about your positioning, I'm having to think about the fact that you're a hunter, I'm going to have to think about your guns, I'm going to think about your movement, like try and get a read on your playstyle. Are you aggressive? Are you passive? Are you waiting for teammates? I have to look at my radar, I have to look at this, that, and the other. There's so much to keep track of for the average player that it's overwhelming, and that's why Trials is so hard for the vast majority of players. It's a lot of information processing.
So, okay, there's all of these new players who are coming in to PvP. Maybe they are new light players from the Shadowkeep era or since then. And I feel like one of the things that I see all the time is basically this thought of, oh, I don't want to use the most common, or let me rephrase it. It's actually not that I don't want to use. A lot of people I've seen comment-wise say that they see people using the equivalent of like the, you know, the spare rations of today, whatever it happens to be. Let's say the 120 hand cannons right now are pretty much the most common thing, whatever that the meta happens to be. And they complain like, oh, you know, I can't have success with that. I don't understand like why I'm not good with it. And I have like sort of 2 thoughts that usually go along with that. Number one is that I don't think that you absolutely have to use the meta to be effective. There's definitely ways to be effective without using the absolute most meta combinations. Like that, you know, people prove this all the time. But I do think that understanding why the meta is very important, because it's basically speaks to your ability to understand the game at a deeper level and understand why certain things work. Like, for example, 120 hand cannons now having all this crazy range, it's like completely opened up the way that engagements happen. Whereas, you know, before, if you were, you know, a hand cannon user, you were forced to be within, you know, 30 meters or so. And now you're like 15 meters further, able to still deal full damage,
Right.
and, you know, potentially even further than that, getting 3 taps. So it's completely changed like the way that a lot of engagement. I mean, 15 meters is, you know, a tremendous improvement over like 30 meters. That's like, you know, what, a 50%
It's
improvement
really,
in the range. It's like huge.
it's really put the cannon back into hand cannon, eh?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's just, you know, it's fundamentally changed. And so it's like, I don't think that you need to use 120s to be effective. I think that, you know, pulse rifles can be very effective. 140 hand cannons can be strong. Auto rifles are still pretty strong. You've shown, you know, with the trustee, you've had a lot of success. So, I mean, I think there's certainly ways to work around that, but I think that it's valuable to understand why certain things tend to be gravitated towards.
Before, I used to tell my students when I was like Choping them and coaching them, is I would just say, use whatever you're comfortable with. It's like I'd have people who'd been playing this game for 2 weeks who were really, really happy with the, I think it's the Ross Lysis, like 450 RPM blue auto rifle. And I say, yeah, just use that. It's squidgy. It's kind of forgiving. It works. Use that, and they would have a lot of success. The minute you stop trying to play weapons that you think you could do well with versus ones that you know you could do well with, you become more of an effective player overall. And if you fight your weapons in the Crucible, like if you're not effective with your weapons, you're fighting being effective with your weapons. So you're fighting 2 battles. You're fighting a battle with yourself in trying to land shots and trying to judge the cadence of the recoil pattern, or just to make sure that you're always in the right position or the right range for your gun. If you're fighting all of that and you have to think about all of that and you're not comfortable with that, then that's another layer of difficulty that you're adding to already a very dynamic and difficult environment, which is the Crucible. So always, like, I will always say to anybody who's new to the Crucible, find guns that you like. And now in this balanced sandbox, that's never been more true, because even like probably the most forgiving archetype of weapon right now is the 390 RPM pulse rifle. And they are fairly competitive, 0.93 time to kill, whereas the 600 RPM auto rifles are 0.8 time to kill. Then you have 140 RPM hand cannons. They're a 0.087 time to kill. 0.87 versus 0.93, nobody can tell the difference between. It's really just now use what you feel comfortable with, because once you're comfortable with certain weapons and you start putting damage in, the best way to get better at the Crucible is find different ways to put damage in. And if you're fighting your weapons, you're not putting damage in. Simple as that. The average player isn't able to interpret space and isn't able to always have their aim consistent, right? Like, you've talked a lot about Kovacs routines and all that, and there are, I'm sure, equivalent routines that you can do on controller for console. And if your aim is not in doubt and your interpretation of space with respect to map and engagement spaces is not in doubt, then yes, these conversations start becoming very, very sensible. They start saying, okay, you can, it's like 1 crit 2 body with a 120. They're too easy. But for a lot of people, they struggle with just landing that shot. And with a 120, you better hit your shot, otherwise it's game over. Otherwise you'll be hitting 4 bodies. If you hit 4 bodies with a 120, you're dead, because it takes forever. So when having these conversations, trying to find the most viable gun to use, take into account who's saying them. It would be my advice. It's like, is someone like Panda saying it? Like, Panda doesn't have to think about aiming with crits. He just does it. So of course he'll probably have a perspective on 120s that would say something like, they're too easy, they're too strong, they're a little bit overpowered. Is somebody who plays a lot of Face It saying, 120s are too overpowered? What is their motivation for saying that? They're usually coming at it from a perspective of, well, if you have 3 120s on a team, that's an instant deletion. So they're probably coming at it from a perspective where they're saying, yeah, from a team shot perspective, it's too strong. Also, if you're playing Face It, chances are you're a damn good aimer yourself. Whereas if you've got someone like myself saying it, I definitely advocate more on the mental side of things. I advocated from more so the average player than the high level player. If I'm saying 120s are fine, they're not strong, they're not balanced, they're not too difficult, why am I saying that? The reason I say 120s are fine is because there is a curve to using them, just like any other gun. And I think that curve is a lot steeper for people who are used to 140s or even 150s, because there's a cadence they have to get used to. There's engagements that there's a whole lots of sightlines they have to get used to. 150 RPM hand cannon players are not necessarily the most well versed in pulse rifle or scout rifle or sniper rifle sightlines, so they have to learn that. But again, like, we're a month. Have we? Beyond Light's been out for what? Nearly 2 months now. Sorry, 2 months.
A month and a half or so. Right?
So people have adjusted to all this. So yeah, my whole shtick here is just say, definitely listen to what people are saying, but understand where they're coming from and why they're saying what they're saying.
I think that's actually something that a lot of newer players haven't really thought about a whole lot, is the different intrinsic benefits to like the types of weapons. So for example,
yes,
as much as they ever nerf hand cannons, they will always be popular among high level players because of the ability to peak shot. It just, the way that they synergize with
damage.
the movement of Destiny, they deal they deal all of their damage in these enormous chunks. So you can do things like you can sit behind cover and peak shot and do all of your damage. You deal all of your damage basically instantaneously. You can unpeak, be safe, and then repeak. It's such a powerful thing in comparison, like, to a high fire rate auto rifle where you have to sit there and basically anytime that you're not peaking, you're losing out on potential DPS because it's a continuous stream of damage instead of a bursty style. And pulse rifles have that a little bit. You can burst with them, but they're not quite as efficient because you do have to be out there for the full duration of the burst, so you can't be as efficient with it. And also, I think there's actually a skill gap that people don't talk about much with pulse rifles, which is that okay, so a hand cannon is like a pure clicking mechanic where basically as long as your crosshair is on the target exactly when you fire, you're dealing full damage. Whereas with a pulse rifle, it's actually two skill sets. It's it's like the clicking of like tracking the target and then clicking at the right time, but it's also tracing the target while it's moving in coordination with the cadence of the burst, which is actually like a pretty complicated skill set. If you talk about something like Kovacs, that's like combining basically like a target switching plus tracking drill at the same time, which is mechanically actually kind of difficult to do, versus like a hand cannon is purely like a moving target clicking scenario.
Yeah, I would say though that pulse rifles, cones, aim assists, whatever you want to call it, it is quite generous, so it's not too difficult to get that burst off once you understand how your gun fires, the recoil pattern, or just generally making sure your red dot is on the target. Which then leads to another aspect of the skill gap that I don't think people talk about as much. It's timing. If you're guaranteed, like for me, it's 33 per head with a 340 RPM pulse rifle. So I tap you once, that's 99 damage. And I know at any point in this engagement between you and me, I can hit you for 99. So do I do it quickly? Well, maybe. Can I wait a little bit and then hit you for 99? Absolutely. It depends on what's your status. Are you low? Are you high? What's going on? If you're full health, obviously I want to put damage in. But if you're low and you're floating around like a madman or running around like a madman and you don't know what you need to be doing, and it's very clear that you're confused by whatever passage of play, then I can just take my time, line the shot up, and make sure I definitely get the 99. Or choose not to take that engagement, maybe come around here because I've seen you're up against the wall, and just put even more pressure on you here. It's totally up to the person. Like, having high reliable damage output allows you to do more things with that damage output. Whereas with a 720 auto, I by necessity I have to be in your face. I have to be aggressive. I have to come close to you. I have to, put shots on you in order for me to get anything out of it. Because if I do the whole cover thing, how much damage am I doing really? Not as much as one burst.
Absolutely. It's kind of funny because you're sort of reminding me of, a technique in Counter-Strike that a lot of players will do, like an AK-47, for example. They'll do that same type of peek shot behind. But the difference is in that game,
you can
one bullet will
bag,
headshot kill. So it's like, it's a completely different mechanic, even though it's the same like type of weapon, so to speak. It's pretty interesting, how the different time to kills impact, like, how different weapons have to be used in a different game.
There's using the meta, and then there's understanding the meta. So there's a reason that people gravitate to, let's say it as it is right now, 120 hand cannons, shotties, and snipers. Hand cannons will always be the best pick in Destiny because of their damage output for just peeking for an instant. Peek, get a shot off back into cover, that's 90 damage. So that's what I mean by understanding the meta. It's like, why do they choose this? I really think hard about that, and that's where you're going to start to see some sort of gap or weakness in the playstyle, in that meta pick. And one of the biggest gaps in people's builds is their resilience level. Let's say 5 resilience makes the 120 RPM hand cannon, the meta pick, take an extra precision shot, and that's huge. So it makes me as a player not necessarily play my strengths, but focus more on my enemy's weaknesses and adapting to that by understanding the meta. So that's in a nutshell how it all combines. I'm gonna just keep hammering in on this topic because I think we're going great places with it. So you can also use things that are established as the meta, but in different ways. And I think a class that has an extremely high skill ceiling, and honestly a very good entry point too, is Top Tree Dawnblade, which is what I have on right now. It has the Icarus Dash, which a lot of people use as just a movement tool to get from point A to B faster, and that to me is the strongest aspect. But understanding the class is one part of the equation, and then understanding the map is the other. Top Tree Dawnblade is essentially uncapped for a top player because you can consume a grenade to have access to angles with accuracy that's 100% that other people just don't have. So even on this map on Exodus Blue, I played Top Tree Dawnblade. I would say that's a meta pick, but I just kept expanding my knowledge of the angles and found a lot of opening picks. One I do want to show you on screen. So what happened a lot of the time is teams would rotate and rotate and rotate around the map looking to find a straggler, and someone would be holding a snipe on this angle where I'm standing right now. And so when my team recognized that, if you can stand right here, when my team recognized that, I found this angle where I consume a grenade, float above the trains, and if you look above the trains, that is a snipe angle. Can you believe that?
Yeah, this map is one of the craziest, I think, for these insane angles that you can get. So many objects like that you can hide behind and float above, and it's really crazy for different off angles.
So understanding the meta, Top Tree Dawn's good, and now adapting it, choosing the off meta thing. My exotic choice is Starfire Protocol, because I find it valuable to have the best part of the Dawnblade up at all times. The angle potential, the in-air accuracy. I use Starfire over the typical transversive step or even Karnstein because it makes more plays for me and it hard counters teams. Nothing is more scary than the possibility of an aerial attack in Destiny. It makes people completely change the way they have to pre-aim. For example, you might be aiming at head level for majority of engagements, but if you know that a Top Tree Dawnblade exists, you might be aiming not exactly up, but also not exactly at head level. You might be above head level to anticipate and try to reduce that distance that you have to correct. And that can make your teammates have a better time fighting someone because now they're not pre-aimed at them, all for having the possibility of an aerial attack. So I think the exotic armor plays into anti-meta too, even if you use it on an established meta class. Not everybody is made for every role, and I built my skills, and I don't think any player will fully master every skill set, every possibility. I'm just talking hypotheticals here and building a perfect Destiny player. For me, I have to accept what's realistic, and for me, in-game leader is the realistic one. Taking that stress off someone else makes me win more. And I also take full responsibility if my call is bad. I know I'm not the best player in this game, but I know that I can have a very high win rate if I build the proper team around me. And you can say I'm carried or whatever, but the only people that matters to me, whether they feel they're carrying or not, is the 2 people I'm bringing with me. Everyone else's opinion does not matter to me in that regard. So as long as my teammates know that I cannot be replaced and they cannot be replaced from my POV, we're probably going to be the best team ever. In Destiny, though, with the landscape of changing metas all the time, it's really hard to stay motivated and competitively motivated, which there's a big difference between your pickup trials team in the weekend and an organized Counter-Strike team with how much they practice and study. Destiny players are not even scratching the surface of being competitive in these games. So I just want to make sure that distinction is put there.
100%. And I mean, this is something I kind of have talked about in a few other videos too, where it's like, one of the things about Destiny is that you're generally speaking always playing different people, right? Like in the matchmaking, like it's, you know, sometimes you might match the same team back to back in trials, but generally speaking, you're playing people you've never come across before. Whereas like when you're talking about like, let's you know, go back to competitive Counter-Strike and look at the pro level where like Team Astralis plays Team Liquid, you know, for like the 100th time in the last few years, you know, there's an entire mental game that goes around like they've seen the tendencies of each other a million times and they know every little detail. And so it's like, you know, a lot of it is just like psychological counterplay of like thinking that someone's going to do this because you've seen them do this a million times. And that just doesn't really exist in Destiny, except for like tournaments and scrim play and stuff where people have played each other enough times to start developing that type of relationship. So, okay, I have an interesting question here. This is one that I think you might have an interesting take on. So, should you practice only one loadout or try to get good at as many loadouts as possible? Where do you fall on that spectrum?
It depends on your amount of time you can invest. If you're pressed for time in Destiny, choose one all-encompassing consistent loadout and stick to that. If you have all the time in the world, pick the greatest hits of the Destiny sandbox. And then maybe two or three things that stick out to you that you personally like. And I think you'll have a pretty well-rounded kit.
People ask me how to get better at sniping, like literally every day. And that's one of the things I tell people is that it's a lot easier, I feel like, to get better at sniping when you just pick one sniper to try to get really good at that has, or at least one zoom distance so that you're not like relearning how to.
Yeah, you don't have to go that extra like I do, where you match the handling stat, the snapshot, the sniper frame, and then all the armor perks together, so it is 1-to-1. Remember how we talked about what makes a skilled Destiny player, and then I talked about the dream skilled Destiny player, the perfect player? One of those things I mentioned was your autopilot. Part of having the snipe stay the same is leveling up your autopilot to where you can hit some nasty shots without even thinking about it. You don't have to be deliberate with your aim. It's just an extension of your hand. It's gonna hit what you think about aiming at without thinking. You can hear the little floof of a warlock jump or a hunter jump starting, and you're going to instinctively put the crosshair where you know it needs to be. With any other zoom level, perk, etc., you have to second guess yourself in that situation. Wait that extra second to make sure it lands. If you stick to the same zoom, you don't have to think anymore. That's the beauty of it. We talked about in-game leader also maybe taking the brunt off other players. The most incredible loadout for me to do that job well is Snipe Lion for 2 reasons. Number 1, it's a gun that I'm practiced with the snipe. I don't have to think about aiming it. And number 2, my teammates can physically see the projectile of Fighting Lion, so it acts almost as a laser designator, which means I don't have to talk as much sometimes. If they see that flying in a certain place, they're already primed to wait for the damage number of whatever the lion hits. So they're already getting the angle ready to clean it up.
Well, it gives so much information, right? Where it's like you say like, oh, hit for 100 damage, and like, so that tells you so much. It tells you, first of all, you know roughly where someone is, but you also like how close they were to them.
They are to death.
Yeah, I mean, like how close their health is to dying, so they know like how much damage you need to still put in. Maybe that's 1 hand cannon shot, 2 hand cannon shots, one.
I'll say absolute or DI, and they know that like that's the time to dive because they've been hit for at least 160 damage.
Yeah, well, also like if you see the projectile going, you know, it's like if you shoot into a hallway and I see you shoot it and I hear you say 100, if I know the gun reasonably well, I know probably where that player is, like pretty close, right? Versus like, you know, if someone's like in B on this map, like
Yeah, I know what you're getting at. Exactly.
you could be anywhere, but if I see the projectile go in and I know like how you shot it and you say 100 damage, I would have a pretty good idea of like without you
Of what you need to do to follow it up.
Exactly, like where I can expect that player to be. Like that's a lot of subconscious information that you don't even have to actually articulate, that gets transferred to me just by you making that one play.
And so now all these things we talked about culminate, and my autopilot's as strong as it can be from sniping on the same zoom. I'm taking mental tax away from my teammates by using a gun that is literally a laser designator. And it also counter meta picks majority of the sandbox. Do you know how annoying it is to get hit by a fighting lion around a corner? So to answer that original question of should you stick to one loadout or explore? Explore till you understand the meta and then stick to one thing that gets you a lot of bang for your buck.
Thanks again to WarThunder for sponsoring this video. You can try it out for free on PC, PlayStation, or Xbox, and use my link in the pinned comment or video description to register. Those of you who are new or haven't played for 6 months will also receive a massive bonus pack across all platforms, including multiple premium vehicles, in-game currency, and more. Thanks for watching, and up next, check out a video I made with my friend Time, who has one of the craziest Warlock builds you've ever seen. It's linked on screen and in the description.